Hey everyone, and happy Halloween! My name's Al Horner, and you're listening to Script Apart, a podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies and TV shows, returning after a short mid-season break. It's great to be back, and man, do we have a fascinating conversation today to come back with. 28 days, 6 hours, 42 minutes, 12 seconds. That is when the world will end. In October 2001, this was the grave warning issued by a 6-foot demonic rabbit named Frank to a then teenage Jake Gyllenhaal, setting in motion the plot of one of the great Halloween movies of our time. Donnie Darko was a time-twisting sci-fi curio about an emotionally troubled teenager. After narrowly escaping a bizarre accident involving a falling jet plane engine, Donnie begins to experience strange visions. The result was an emotional, unknowable gem of a movie that's still inviting scrutiny and analysis today. The film initially struggled to find an audience in the aftermath of 9/11, then gradually became this cult obsession. 21 years later, fans across the world continue to attempt to unravel its mysteries. But the thing about Donnie Darko, in my experience, is the more that you try and unravel this film, the more this film unravels you. That's the level of brain-bending existentialism that writer-director Richard Kelly, my guest today, was operating at when he wrote the film, aged just 24. It's pretty spectacular. I had the pleasure of chatting with Richard, and in the conversation you're about to hear, we break down in detail the mysteries and meanings of all the most intriguing motifs and moments in Donnie Darko. Discover the origins of the unsettling rabbit Frank, who shares an unlikely connection with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Hear how Y2K concerns and election time anxiety influenced the film's atmosphere of dread, and find out why the true evil in Donnie Darko is not Frank, but the puritanical streak that runs rampant in suburban America, both then and now. Oh, and you'll also probably want to listen out to the end for some intriguing details about a Donnie Darko sequel that's even more ambitious, even bigger than the first film. Richard's actually been in contact with Jake Gyllenhaal about developing that. So yeah, maybe Donnie's story isn't quite over yet. Be sure to listen out for that. A massive thank you, as ever, to our supporters on Patreon for helping make this episode possible. Head to patreon.com/scriptapart if you'd like to get involved there. We really do appreciate your support. As I mentioned at the top of this, it really is just so nice to be back. And well, you guys have waited long enough for a new episode, so I'm going to stop talking. Let's just dive into it. This is the amazing Richard Kelly discussing the first draft secrets of Donnie Darko. Thank you so much for tuning in. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Richard Kelly, so great to have you with us. We're talking, of course, in mid-October, fast approaching Halloween, which is a time of year at which movie fans the world over revisit Donnie Darko as this now quintessential Halloween text. Is October inextricable from Donnie for you as its creator, the way it is for fans? Like, do you find yourself reflecting on that character, his story, and everything that you accomplished with that film once Halloween nears? Or after 21 years, have you managed to kind of find some distance between the two?
Well, I think the film is definitely always linked to Halloween and always linked to the month of October because it's just so much part of the story. It's funny. I sat down and I wrote the script in October of 1998, believe it or not, only 10 years after the film takes place. I was literally just finishing college, getting out of college at USC in Los Angeles. And so the month of October was just sort of integral to the story, and the sort of demarcation of time and the sort of the countdown of the 28-day timeline in the film is very much sort of wedded to the countdown to Halloween and the climax of the film. So yeah, every time October 2nd rolls around, I'm just sort of reminded of this sort of imaginary anniversary in the film where the jet engine comes down and the sort of piercing of the space-time continuum kind of occurs there. And so, yeah, we're sort of in that limbo tangent universe right now, I guess. But yeah, every year it just keeps coming back to me that this is a Halloween film for sure.
Yeah, it must be strange and beautiful to be 2 decades on and still be kind of, hearing from people caught up in the hypnotic effect of this incredible story. When you see people kind of posting their photos online, dressed as Donnie or Frank from a Halloween party, when you see debates raging once again about the film and the many ways that it's interpretable, what do you put it down to each Halloween, as there is this revisit of Donnie Darko en masse? Like, is there an explanation you've landed on for the incredible longevity of this film?
Well, having digested this thing, created it, obviously I created it in a very fast, emotional a rush of kind of inspiration, but having digested it along with the audience and with fans for 20 years, I've kind of just discovered that there's a real expansive architecture to the story that kind of plugs into a much bigger world and a much bigger universe. And there's this whole world that sort of exists in the peripheral of the film. And I think people kind of re-engage with the narrative over and over again, and they sort of can plug into accessing a much bigger world, I guess. And I've been doing it as the person who created this thing, and I've sort of been exploring it and going deeper and deeper into it. And I'm just starting to, I guess, see that beneath the initial blueprint of the film is just dozens more blueprints, I guess. And so there's that element to it, which is like the architecture to it, right? But then I guess then there's just the style, and then there's the music, and then there's the sort of the humor, and just all of this sort of aesthetics that I guess are pleasing enough to people that it gives them this sort of glossy polish over the architectural kind of underpinnings of the whole thing, So I don't know. I think any story, thinking like an architect, it has to have a really strong foundation and really strong blueprints to it. And luckily, I think the film has those. And that's kind of where it all begins. But you got to have the aesthetics too.
Cards on the Table, it really was such a formative film for me growing up. Like, I discovered it at roughly the same age that Donnie is in the film, and it just had this electrifying effect and managed to bottle so many emotions that I was experiencing at that time. So, like, on paper, it occurred to me in preparation for this conversation that, like, the further I get away from that kid I was when I discovered Donnie Darko, that teenager on the brink of nihilism, the less I should be able to relate, the less I should love this film. But instead, every time I come back to this movie, it feels more vital to me. And I was wondering if that's a common thing you hear, and whether you think, like, the valuation of this film, and kind of all your work really, given the swings that you love to take as a storyteller, do you find that valuation has grown among fans as we've moved into an arguably more risk-averse, maybe slightly more homogenized movie-making landscape?
Well, revisiting this thing all these years later, the world has changed a lot in 20 years. And there's something about the film, I think, being a period piece. Donnie's a little bit older. The character's a little older than I was, in 1988, but there's obviously a lot of me in the character and a lot of my childhood in the story. And so there's nostalgia in looking back at it. But because the movie was sort of created in a time warp, we were in the year 2000 making a movie about 1988, so we were already in this strange time warp. And then with everything that has happened since the movie was made, I've grown up with the movie. We've all sort of grown up with it. And, you never know how things are going to age, but I don't know. I think we look back at it through like the lens of middle age. I'm in my 40s now, and I look back at it through this lens of being a middle-aged man. And yes, it feels different, but the movie is still the same. It's still the same damn movie that's existed, but we've all kind of changed and grown and everything. And so I don't know. I think that adolescence is a part of us. We're all children. Our bodies age and we get old and we pass on, but we're still children inside. We'll always be children. We'll always have that adolescence inside of us. And I don't know. There's just something about about the film that maybe it's timelessness, but maybe it's also just these emotions never leave us. You know, we just hold on to we hold on to these things forever. You know, I don't know. I'm trying to. I'm still trying to solve this thing, and not solve it. I'm just trying to continue to make sense of it, I guess. And as I do with all of my work, you know, these things remain unfinished, I guess is the best way to describe it.
That phrase you just used of trying to make sense of this thing still to this day, that leads me really nicely onto something I was wondering. You mentioned a moment ago that, you know, this thing flew out of you pretty quickly. You described writing it in a rush almost, it came out of you in a rush. You wrote the script in a month. You've described it being the culmination of 23 years of being alive. And then, of course, there was this month period of actually writing the thing. Now, typically, when I'm able to write that quickly, it's this, on the very few occasions that's the case, it's this eruption of my subconscious almost. And I'm being led by instinct and intuition, kind of not unlike that motif in the movie of the kind of translucent beams pulling people from place to place. Was that the case for you then? When you describe this thing kind of rushing out of you, when you describe like still trying to make sense of it to this day, is there an element to which, you know, when you were writing Donnie Darko, it was an explosion of pure id over kind of ego and superego?
Yes, it was definitely from the id, but being the child of a scientist, you know, my dad is literally was a rocket scientist, you know, who worked for NASA. And so with my id comes this sort of, I keep coming back to the architect that I could have been in a different life. I wanted to be an architect. So looking at that October calendar that Donnie is looking at in the movie, that's me as a 22, 23-year-old screenwriter writing this thing that the id came out with a focus on strong architectural blueprints, you know? So like, I think the best writing comes out in a rush like that. I think that you shouldn't start writing until you've got it all mapped out in your head. And I do a lot of outlining now, but back then I wasn't a disciplined writer. I was a very just emotionally explosive kind of creator, you know, which is a good thing, but it's not disciplined. But I think the discipline just came out of, again, having this sort of architectural background in the sense of that I could build the movie on this timeline, you know, on this month of October where the whole story plays out, you know. And so, you know, I had this idea of the jet engine that falls mysteriously and the voice that draws Donnie out of bed. And then I had this 28-day timeline, you know, and I wrote those numbers out. And I thought, okay, is that the lunar cycles? Is that like a menstrual cycle? Has something to do with the tides of the ocean? You know, what is this? But it's okay, it's going to land right around Halloween. And so that's the sort of the architecture of the whole thing. And then I just started mapping it out. But yes, it came from the id, and it came from a lot of just childhood memories and experiences, and just this sort of maelstrom of things from my childhood. But again, there was a design element to it. And, you know, that's my recommendation to any writer. Like, don't start writing your screenplay until you've got the blueprints, at least mentally, like figured out. Like, you should really have a pretty strong indication of how the movie is going to end before you start writing the beginning. You know, that's kind of my thing. Because once you have that, then it just comes flooding out. The floodgates are open, you know, like don't start writing until the floodgates have opened. Because so much of writing is just the mental thinking and the mapping out and the brainstorming, and that's the kind of excruciating part. But when you're actually typing, you want the floodgates to be open. And so that was 23 years of water building up, and then the flood, you know, like the visual effect that I could ever afford to do in the school, where I wanted a whole massive wave of water to come crashing into the school. And we never got the visual effects I wanted, but that was a kind of a metaphor for a lot of things. But one of them being the floodgates of my mind opening up.
All right, let's do the script apart $1 million question. Richard, how do you sum up your first draft of this movie? Like, I'm aware it was 140 pages, so considerably longer even than the director's cut ended up being. Yeah, what were the main differences between that initial vision for Donnie Darko and the movie that it became?
It's still the original draft was pretty damn close to the finished film, and a lot of the additional scenes in the director's cut, some of which are a little extraneous. The director's cut is sort of paced a bit more like television, and it's a bit more novelistic, and it has a bit more of the mythology, and it's sort of like hinting at a much kind of bigger kind of world. But the original script was pretty damn close to everything that you see. There was just a little bit more additional. It was probably nowadays people would look at it and say, "Oh, this is written a bit more like TV," because in TV you can take your time and you can have a lot more supporting character development. You can spend a little bit more time with Donnie's parents. You can spend a little bit more time with Karen Pomeroy, the Drew Barrymore's character, and a little bit more time with the teachers and the other people in Donnie's community. It's still Donnie is the center of this movie, but there's scenes where Donnie is the subject of everyone's conversation, but you're with the therapist, Catherine Ross, her character, and so a little bit more of the supporting characters have a bit more screen time, and it's a bit more novelistic, I guess. But when you're making a movie for the theatrical experience, it needs to be a little bit tighter, and the theatrical cut is much probably more satisfying to watch, in a theater. But kind of now we're in this world of streaming where you have these more novelistic narratives, much longer, sprawling narratives that you can digest in pieces and stuff. And so, but yeah, the first draft was probably just kind of written a bit more with the extra sort of, first draft kind of fat, but everything was there. I think the one kind of character that got lost, there was an art teacher character where Donnie's in art class, and there's a lot of drawings that you see in the movie that I did those drawings. I grew up, doing a lot of drawing and illustration, and I have a visual arts background. And so there was a little bit more of an exploration of Donnie being an artist and being able to draw, and the conversations with his art teacher about what the drawings mean. And, he had a drawing of the rabbit and stuff. And so it was a little repetitive because he has those similar conversations with Drew Barrymore's character in the English class. And so it was just like one too many teachers. And I remember when we were budgeting the movie, when you're 24 years old and you sign your life away, I signed all the rights away to this thing. I was 24 years old. I was in the Writers Guild, but they made me do it non-signatory to the Writers Guild. So I don't even get residuals on this movie or anything. So I signed my life away. And one of the things that they do when you're budgeting a movie is can you cut this? Can you cut that? Can you get rid of this? Can you consolidate that? And I was pretty damn stubborn. They wanted me to get rid of the liquid spear tendrils. They were like, why is that necessary? Get rid of those. I'm like, no, those are necessary. So I fought, but the one thing they were like, can you cut the art teacher? Can you get rid of the art teacher? We don't want to have to pay. We want to cut a cast member, because that's money, the budget. They always want you to cut cast members down, so the art teacher got cut, and we actually had an actor who was going to play him. And it was sad to have to inform him that his character, because we had actually cast the role. Anyway. But other than that, it was, there's stuff I wanted to do at the end. I never got to do the visual effects I wanted for the sort of exploding. We got the interior of the exploding plane pretty well done with Mary McDonnell and that's shaking a camera and some light and stuff and some smoke, but it looks really effective. But I never got to do the plane ripping apart and the jet engine, how the lightning striking the plane and the jet engine ripping off of the plane and ripping apart, and the jet engine falling down through the time portal, and that all of that CGI was supposed to be this spectacular kind of the way that Christopher Nolan would get to do it. I was 24. Yeah. They're not going to give me. They were like, this movie's insane. We can't believe anyone is letting you make this, So I wasn't going to get my Chris Nolan exploding plane and jet engine falling through a time portal. I wasn't going to get that. So yeah, I got about as far as we could get with it, being a 24-year-old who they were giving a budget of $4.5 million to make his first film. That's an incredible luxury, and the fact that we even got to make the film was like a victory in and of itself. So, very proud of what we were able to get on screen. Again, I never got the CGI that I felt like we needed, but this is my first film.
Richard, like other movies of yours are quite obvious, like time capsules in a way. Like Southland Tales, you can really feel the kind of post 9/11 anxiety kind of coursing through it, or certainly I've always interpreted it that way. What do you think you bottled about late 90s America, either consciously or subconsciously, as you wrote Donnie Darko? Like there's a line that Drew Barrymore's character gets in the film about losing kids to apathy. And, it was a time in which teenagers were increasingly nihilistic and unknowable and inscrutable to older generations. Like, was that something you were trying to explore and peel back? Were there any kind of like social elements of that time that you were pouring into this script, either kind of, as I say, consciously or subconsciously?
It's funny that you bring up that line that Drew Barrymore has about the kids having to figure it out these days because the parents have no clue. I think it's something close to that is the line. I had the wonderful honor of meeting Francis Ford Coppola when we were putting this movie together. And Jason Schwartzman was originally going to play Donnie. And Jason is this lovely, lovely man. I owe him my career in a lot of ways because he really got behind this script when everyone thought that it was just a writing sample. And he really got behind it. I think Jake would say the same thing, that because they're childhood friends, they grew up together, and that we both owe Jason Schwartzman a great debt for getting behind this movie. And he arranged this wonderful meeting with Francis Ford Coppola. And Francis, I'll never forget, he had the script in a binder. We were at American Zoetrope in the Miracle Mile area of Los Angeles, and he slid the binder across the grand conference room table at American Zoetrope. And he had a line of dialogue circled with a pen. And he says, that's what your script is about. That line right there. And it was the Drew Barrymore line about parents having to figure it out these days, or the kids having to figure it out these days because the parents have no clue. And that's what Francis Ford Coppola said what my whole script was about. And he was right in so many ways. Again, that's one of those lines of dialogue that comes from the id, I guess. We see it now that I'm the older generation. I'm in my 40s, and we look at sort of kind of Generation Z. We call them Zoomers, and there's a lot of like conflict between, I'm on the young side of Gen X. I'm sort of close to the Gen X millennial cusp, I guess. But, we've got millennials, but then we have Zoomers, and we look at the conflict between the generations, and the Zoomers, saying, okay, boomer, the people, the generations mocking each other and stuff. I just, that never goes away. I think that's a tale as old as time, back in the Viking, the Vikings were mocking the Zoomer Vikings. I don't know, like in medieval times, I'm sure there has been intergenerational, conflict, but I think that it has something to do with technology and the way that our lives are now being so aggressively kind of documented by technology, and everything is recorded, everything's online, and all of our thoughts are barfed out in these sort of grotesque social media channels and stuff. And so I think those conflicts between generations are becoming much more raw and sort of exposed and kind of granular in their sort of obnoxious back and forth, and so, but I don't know. I mean, like you look at John Hughes movies and stuff, like I was maybe riffing on John Hughes quite a bit when writing this. You think movies like The Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and all those movies had that kind of teenagers sort of pushing back and against their parents' generation. And so that's just a tale as old as time, I guess. And it just seems like it's coming into sharper and much more granular focus, probably because of social media and because of, again, all of our nonsense is just broadcast 24/7 now in granular detail on smartphones and social media sites and stuff. But Yeah, yeah. But now I'm the in the parents' generation, so I get to be the one that everyone makes fun of, that the young kids make fun of.
It's interesting that that would be the line that Francis would pick up on as being the pure distillation of this movie. The one that stuck out for me on my most recent kind of read through the script was the interaction about Donnie Darko having a superhero style name. And because it's true, this is a story about a boy who sacrifices himself to save the world. There is a superhero element to this film. To what degree was that something playing on your mind as you kind of initially set out on this story? Obviously, you realized at some point that there is a superhero quality to it, and you worked that line into the script. But yeah, at what point were you kind of like viewing this story through that lens?
It was always there. I named him Donnie Darko. The name just popped into my head, and I'm like, it's kind of a comic book superhero movie, under the surface. That's under the surface, because there's, if you look at the tangent universe of the 28-day timeline that's, written, the number written on his arm and the countdown to the apocalypse, that's this sort of dream world, and Donnie does things that are kind of superhuman that you see throughout the movie, whether it's the foresight, that he has, but also, swinging an axe into the head of a bronze statue, with the leading to the flooding of the school, and when he's able to carry Gretchen, the shot of him carrying Gretchen's body home at the end, like that's a kind of a nod to a superhero, a Superman type image, whether it's, Superman carrying Lois Lane or any superhero carrying like the damsel in distress, in his arms. Like that's not something that someone should be able to do normally. And that as the movie progresses, you realize you're in this sort of dream world. And yeah, there was definitely all of that sort of beneath the surface, in that maybe this was some kind of origin story in a way, but it was just sort of like beneath the surface of the blueprints, kind of like on a subcutaneous level, because I was really more interested in exploring the sort of character dynamics and the sort of all of the sort of cultural conflict in October of 1988, all the conflict between the students and the teachers, and the sort of all the themes and all that. So, but the superhero stuff was sort of just, right there, very present, very important, very part of the mechanics of the whole thing. But, only just scratching the surface of that kind of that element to it. But it was definitely there, and I was never a big, I can't say that I was ever like a big comic book person growing up. I was much more of like a Stephen King kid. I was reading Stephen King and Philip K. Dick and a lot more science fiction novels, as opposed to, reading comic books. But I was aware of the superhero connection without question, that Donnie was sort of evolving or becoming that over the course of the movie, that he was being elevated into a much greater spiritual kind of place.
You mentioned that like you were really interested in the dynamics of that particular month in history, that the conflicts that were going on. One of those conflicts in the film is like a sort of election that sort of sits in the backdrop of this movie and kind of has this ambient hum that kind of fills the entire plot. That's a real kind of recurring element in your movies. Like, it comes up in Southland Tales again. And I'm curious, like, what you find so rich about election time as a backdrop, and whether there was like a formative experience of an election as a kid that set the wheels in motion for that part of your signature as a filmmaker, Richard.
It's funny, we shot this movie in August of 2000 is when we started shooting this film. And believe it or not, when we were shooting this film, Bill Clinton was still our president. That's how long ago it was. It was his final year of his presidency. And we were on the eve of an election in the United States that would elect George W. Bush. And the consequences of that election soon became very apparent. So when we were making the film, we were on this cusp of change. And we felt as we were making the film that there was a seismic shift kind of about to happen. And we were very young, Jake was 19 going on 20. I just turned 25, I think. So we were very young. In a lot of ways, Jake felt like he was my age or older. Just he was like, even in a lot of ways, he was more mature than I was, having grown up in Hollywood, and he'd seen it all, and he'd been on movie sets since he was a little kid. And here I was from Virginia, trying to prove myself as a director, just out of college myself. And so, but we were aware of this seismic kind of shift happening in our country, and these elections have major consequences. And so, looking back at 1988, it was almost like, okay, well, the 1988 election had major consequences to the 2000 election, because you're looking at father and son and this political dynasty, and these political dynasties going head to head, and we're still dealing with it, that these elections have major consequences. And so, I don't know, we were kind of looking back, and we didn't know how things were going to unfold. We didn't even really know how the 2000 election was going to play out. It was still August, it could have gone either way. And look how close that election was, but we just knew that there was something in the air, right? It just felt like there was we were entering, a new century. It was, remember Y2K, but we had I don't know when does the new century, did it begin in 2001 or 2000? There's this argument of like when we were in this sort of 2000 was like this crazy, very consequential year, but it just happened to be marking the division, the division between two centuries. So we were just in this kind of very substantial moment in time. And we were these young kids, like trying to make sense of it all. Right. And so, and again, this is all before 9/11. And then after 9/11, it just sort of retroactively made me think like, oh God, like, what does this all mean? How does this all connect to this devastating tragedy that has occurred, and, I'll never stop trying to make sense of it, but, these are the formative events of our adolescence for a lot of us, and our young adulthood. And it's something that we'll just continue to try to make sense. We're still trying to make sense of it to this day.
That's really interesting that you mentioned Y2K, because of course I remember, around that time, one of the big concerns was there would be planes falling out of the sky. So I did wonder whether there was a literalism to this film as a sort of product of Y2K anxiety.
It's funny how like Y2K ended up kind of being this big nothing burger, right? I guess it was like a lot of hype, a lot of people like, we're going to charge your company $500,000 to come in and protect your computer systems from Y2K. I don't know, all people spent all this money, maybe it was money well spent. I'd have to go back and see how grave a threat Y2K really was, but it seems like some of those threats now, and what we've experienced and what we've endured, and the horrible things that have happened since then in our world, it just seems like, wow, is that all we were really worried about? Was something like as innocuous as Y2K? There's a nostalgia there. But again, at the time, the stakes were very high for us. And again, when you're young, you look back at how trivial things were, or the things that got you all riled up, and how trivial those things were. But I don't know. It was a much more innocent time in a lot of ways, and we were certainly worried, and we were paranoid, but we were also filled with hope and promise, and we were trying to make a statement. We really were trying to make a statement, and I'm proud of that we did that. There's always pushback. There's always people. There's always people in Hollywood who are like, stop making statements. Stop pushing people's buttons, just stay in your lane, make a dumb horror film, that's what they want, but I don't know. That's not what I'm ever going to do.
To dive into the script itself, Richard, there are a few things that always surprise me when I return to this film, and yeah, they're there on the page. For starters, I always forget the levity of this movie. Like the early scene around the dinner table where Donnie and his family are kind of bickering. It's so funny. There's a hilarious conversation a few minutes later where Donnie is discussing with his friends the inner sexual workings of the Smurfs community. Yeah, so funny. I always forget that there's that humor kind of bristling beneath the surface of this otherwise very emotionally charged, very complex film. Another thing that always surprises me that I'm kind of reminded of anew when I read the script is, for all that complexity that we've discussed, there is actually, there are simple things happening from a screenwriting perspective in some regard. Like, people always stress the importance of finding your story a sense of urgency, a sense that we're culminating towards something, a ticking clock. And Donnie Darko really has like the most effective ticking clock. You have this countdown to the end of the world initiated by Frank, this man in a rabbit costume, if he indeed is a man. There's been other speculation. I've been watching your interviews, listening to your interviews for 20 years now, and witnessing your protectiveness about the kind of ambiguities of this film, the ways it might be interpreted. So to any degree that you're comfortable answering this question, who was Frank to you, and where did that idea of this countdown to the end of the world come from? As I say, it's such a complex film, but that is such a simple and effective screenwriting 101 device that you've employed there.
First of all, everyone likes to ask, is Frank evil? And the answer is no. The answer is definitively, for me, absolutely not. I believe Frank is a benevolent mentor. There's a shapeshifter there. There's a herald. There's a mentor. There's all the Joseph Campbell archetypes of the different mythologies. Frank is kind of so many of those things. He's a trickster. He's a shapeshifter. He's all of them all mixed into one. There's all the colors in the Joseph Campbell rainbow are in Frank, but he is a benevolent figure. He's not evil. The mask is a misrepresentation. You think that it's an evil mask or it's demonic. It's meant to trick you into thinking that, but there's a benevolence to Frank, and there is maybe a bit of like an Obi-Wan Kenobi there, kind of in sort of mentoring or ushering Donnie into a higher supernatural realm in a lot of ways. So, and in terms of the countdown, it just, again, I'm always very, very cognizant of place and time whenever I'm writing. Now, the timeline of Donnie Darko is very definitive. The place is a very nebulous, mysterious thing, and when you're watching the movie, you're like, where does this take place? Is it Virginia? We put Virginia on the license plates, but it's not quite Virginia. It's this sort of dreamscape, and if you ask me, at the very end of the movie, when we're back on October 2nd and Donnie is deceased, that in my mind, we're not in Virginia, that we're in Southern California, that we're in Long Beach, where we shot the movie. And you're
at the Aero Cinema, that's Santa Monica.
Well, you see all these little pieces of greater Southern California, whether you're in the San Angeles Crest Mountains or you see very recognizable Southern California. In my mind, the twist at the end of the movie is that you're really in Southern California, and that this dream world was sort of a misrepresentation of Virginia, that it was a misdirect, and I obviously grew up in Virginia, and I traveled to Southern California to become a filmmaker and go to college at USC and sort of the bridge between those two planes. But, with that said, the countdown, to the apocalypse was meant to be sort of rooted in math and rooted in a very, the way that the days of the calendar are sort of doled out in terms of screen time. And, it's funny, when we were editing the film after Sundance, we had a very, very disruptive, upsetting Sundance premiere, because the movie was just, no one knew what to do with it. Everyone was just like, what? It was not marketable. It was just, we had all these strikes against us in terms of the distribution apparatus of Hollywood. They did not want to distribute our movie. They did not want to they didn't know how to market it. We were in rough shape, but the movie got kind of rescued by Aaron Ryder, and then who had just produced Memento, and he brought in Christopher Nolan and his wife Emma, his wonderful wife and producing partner. And after they screened the movie at Newmarket and they supported the movie, and they looked right over at the Newmarket executives, and they were like, you should buy this, you should distribute this. And they were very supportive, and I owe them a great debt for helping get this movie distribution. One of Emma's suggestions was, Richard, for the title cards, when you see the title cards pop up, they're very integral to the story and advancing the suspense of the narrative forward. When you see those title cards pop up, very important. She's like, you should put in parentheses how many days remain. And it was a wonderful note that she gave. And we listened and we did it. We added the parentheses where explaining exactly how many days remain. It's a reminder in a sort of kind of tongue-in-cheek way. There's 14 days until the apocalypse. It's just a reminder in these parentheses. But it was a wonderful note, And we also did one little additional, not a reshoot, because when I don't like the word reshoots, because that implies that you got something wrong or that you screwed up and you have to redo something. It was additional photography. We did one day of additional photography. And this was a Chris and Emma note too, was during the Mad World montage when everyone has awakened from the communal dream and there's been a rupture in the space-time continuum and the artifact has fallen and Donnie has surrendered to the artifact. Everyone's waking up in bed and you hear the Mad World song and you see everyone. We did not shoot James Duval and his Frank the Bunny mask in its early incarnation. We didn't shoot that. We didn't include him in the wake up montage for whatever reason. We just didn't have time, or it didn't occur to us to include him. But here he is, one of the most essential enigmatic characters of the whole thing. You need to see James Duval and Frank and the origin of the mask in the Mad World montage. We needed that. It was a wonderful note. And so, they scraped together a little bit of money and we went to Panavision and the soundstage, and we set up this little bedroom set and the easel and all my sketches of the drawing, and we had the original metal mold of the rabbit, and we had brought in James Duval, and he touches his eye, and we did this elegant shot where we pan down and we land on the mask, and it tied it all together. It tied the whole Mad World montage together, and it was this incredibly important shot that we did right, several months after Sundance, before the movie was headed, towards a modest theatrical release, and then 9/11 happened, and everything just went down all the marketing, all the ground, the grassroots marketing, and no one even wanted to think about anything. It was just like we were lucky that the movie was able to even hold on to the 50 some theaters that they had booked. We thought we were going to lose the theaters. We thought they were going to cancel the release, but they had already spent the money to book the theaters, and they had already paid for some newspaper print ads, back when people paid for those, so they just had to go let the movie be released, so it just kind of went out into the ether, on October 26, 2001, the movie was released, to a terrible per screen average of $1,100 per screen, and I'll never forget the message, the voicemail I got from my agent about the per screen average of the movie and how depressing it was, that the movie had just sort of had such a poor, soft release, but I think it went on to make like over 500,000, with no marketing, zero marketing spent, but, these things, they have legs. These stories never die.
So you mentioned a moment ago that Frank is not the evil in this film. I think there's an argument to be made. Certainly my view of the movie has always been that the evil in Donnie Darko, it's kind of almost like the Christian fundamentalism that's running through this picket fence community. Patrick Swayze's character is the embodiment of that, obviously, and the hypocrisies, the malevolence that can be contained within that particular strain of Puritanism. There's some really purposeful intercutting on the page and in the movie between Donnie burning down a building and Donnie's sister taking part in this pageant where she and her friends are dancing in this almost sexualized way that the community is lapping up. There seems to be something that the film is trying to say in this regard about America then, America now. Where, of course, right now, back in this time of books being banned by schools in the US, which is something that crops up in this movie. Talk me through what you were trying to express, or what, when you look back at the movie, you can see now that maybe your subconscious was trying to express. What was that whole subplot of the movie about, Richard?
Yeah, well, I think that the Jim Cunningham, the Patrick Swayze character, was sort of, one of maybe the primary, reveal that he's like one of the big villains of the story, that it's not the rabbit. It's not that Frank isn't the villain of the story. It's the Patrick Swayze character, and that Donnie sort of exposes him and, burning the house down and exposing the sort of the evil beneath the surface there. And I guess maybe the way that kind of thematically ties into the sort of the idea of exploitation of young women or young girls, and the idea of the way we push young people into show business, and the way that young women in particular can feel exploited or have their lives turned upside down, by Hollywood, and the sort of exploitation that exists in Hollywood. And having Drew Barrymore as a producer on this film, and having Drew sort of watching and sort of with empathy and in judgment at the Sparkle Motion, dancers, and what she experienced as a young woman, as a child star, and the sort of horrific experiences that she endured and survived and triumphed over, the triumphant story of Drew Barrymore overcoming so many of those experiences that she had that were really devastating experiences. And so, I don't know, I think we were maybe trying to sort of, capture all of that in this sort of, I was remembering like talent show competitions in high school, and cheerleading competitions, and, competitive cheerleading moms. And that was all it's all real. You see, no matter what part of the suburbs you grow up, if you look at America as one gigantic suburb, with different sort of income levels, or some houses are nicer than others, but it's all just a gigantic landscape of suburban life. There's a lot of dark, sinister things that exist beneath the surface, beneath the facade. And so, yeah, we were definitely trying to explore that, and maybe the idea of exploitation and adults exploiting children or abusing children. I mean, that's about as horrific as it gets. And that just seemed like a logical kind of, if it's a misdirect, that the rabbit is not the real villain of the story, that he's actually this sort of mentor or shapeshifter or trickster, or all of that, a supernatural kind of guide, mentoring Donnie into a supernatural realm. And then the true villain is this sort of like self-help guru who's hiding this about it, the most evil thing possible, beneath the surface, and that Donnie sort of gets to expose that and burn that down, I guess, as sort of that Frank is giving him benevolent instructions, I guess. So yeah, it was just sort of the logical conclusion of my mind. Who's going to be the real villain of this movie? Okay, someone who exploits children. What's more horrific and villainous than that, I guess.
And you mentioned at the top of this the importance of identifying your ending before you embark on the writing process. And the ending of this film is just so perfect. There's every single element of this film may not be explained, but it comes back and it has a rhyme to it. And there's no kind of loose threads in that regard. It's also so like emotionally impactful. How did you arrive at this ending? What's happening in this ending as you see it, Richard? And were there kind of other things you explored en route to working out that this was the right way to end the film? Well,
there was an enormous amount of discourse and frustration when we were trying to put the movie together. People were very troubled by the ending. They were bothered by it, but they were sort of like, that was the whole reason why we got the meeting to begin with, is because of the ending. They were fascinated by the ending, but they had questions and they had comments, and some people wanted more clarity. Some people were confused and frustrated and angry, and they passed and they said no. I mean, I remember we had this one hilariously awful meeting with this company, and it was the woman who had financed the movie Anaconda, the big snake movie with Jennifer Lopez and Owen Wilson and Ice Cube. She had made that movie, and we went and met with her and a bunch of other financiers, and she was going to maybe pay for the movie, but she had read the script and had spent the 20 minutes before we got to the meeting arguing with everyone about the ending. And she was angry. Like the ending made her angry. And so she started just like yelling at us, and she just got up and stormed out of the meeting to go pick up her daughter at ballet class. She wasn't going to finance the movie because the ending didn't make sense to her. She could not make sense of it, and she didn't like the ending. And this was a no-go. The Anaconda lady was not going to finance Donnie Darko. Yeah, so God bless her, and I wish her well. But it was, the ending was a frustrating thing for people because Donnie does not get out of bed at the end. The engine kills him. Why? That's the big question. Why didn't he get out of bed? Why did he surrender to this jet engine? Why is he laughing? That's the big question about this movie. And it's the frustrating thing about it, because you spent these 28 days with Donnie, and he's, been exposed to this supernatural phenomenon. You want him to survive this, and you want him to emerge. Part of me was like, you want him to get out of bed and dodge the jet engine. But then you think, oh wait, he already did that. He already was drawn out of bed. So maybe he's been exposed to something much bigger than this world, and that he's, so it just felt like he had to go, that he needed to die at the end. But I got to tell you, having killed 3 protagonists in 3 movies, it's not easy. Audiences don't like it when you kill your protagonists. Test screening audiences don't like it when you kill your hero. Cinema scores don't come back with high grades when you kill I've pretty much had it with killing my lead character, because it's too hard. It's such an uphill battle with audiences, and it's just having done it 3 times, I think it's safe to say in future movies that my protagonist will very likely survive by the end credits. But it just felt like it needed to have this sort of devastating ending. And you needed to see the family there devastated at the end. But the important thing is, with my direction to Mary McDonnell at the end, and her sort of, when she waves at Jenna Malone, and the young actor, Scotty Leavenworth, who had just been in Erin Brockovich, he played Julie Roberts' son in Erin Brockovich, the little kid at the end of the movie. That she waves at them, and she has this connection, and that she has this residual memory of the 28 days. There's something going on with Rose, played by Mary McDonnell, at the end of the film, where she kind of knows that her son was meant to die this way, and that he had experienced something transcendent, and that she has a residual memory of it. And perhaps because in the dream that she was on this plane that exploded in the dream. And, again, I never got to do my Christopher Nolan jet engine ripping from the plane and going to the time portal, but I think Rose sort of experienced that in her dream. And so she kind of knows that her son was exposed to something profound, and she's sort of at peace with her son's death, like in the PTSD shock and the aftermath. And that's why she's kind of waving. And some people were confused by that moment at the end, but it was really important to me. And I remember talking with Mary, who's one of our finest actresses, about that final moment. And it came together very quickly. But right when I saw her wave, and then the wave back with Jenna Malone and Scotty Leavenworth there, I was like, okay, that's the final shot of the movie. There we go. That's the final shot. That's it. And it's meant to leave you feeling very sad and emotionally drained. But I don't know, that I wanted there to be a sense of a touch of hope at the end with Mary McDonnell, and that connection with Jenna Malone at the end. That there was some kind of purpose or something bigger about Donnie's sort of surrendering at the end, or sacrificing himself at the end. It just felt like that's the way the puzzle pieces needed to come together. But audiences aren't, necessarily, it's funny, like it's we never had the money to. Sundance was our first test screening of this movie, and it did not go well. Like, we were roundly rejected by distributors at Sundance with this movie for a multitude of reasons. One of which was the ending was so disturbing and sad. Test audiences, these algorithms and these formulas that they try to shape your art and make your art more audience friendly and more profitable, and to monetize and sculpt and shape your art for audience satisfaction. They don't like it when your hero dies at the end. That's the sort of bullshit we got to deal with as filmmakers. So. But it just felt right for this movie, Sometimes the hero has to go out in a pine box at the end, So, but we were able to get our ending, I never got my visual effects, but I got my ending the way I wanted, I guess.
The fact that you did kill off your protagonist here made it all the more curious to me when I read a couple of years ago now, I think 2017, that you were exploring a sequel of some sorts that was bigger, more ambitious. Just finally today, can you tell me anything about that project and whether it's something you're still exploring, whether you think it's something we'll see kind of eventually come to screen?
Well, there's been a lot of work done. We've been under the hood. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we've been working on. There is a much bigger world. There's a lot that has happened since Donnie's departure from Earth. And I would like to think that there's a reason why he didn't get out of bed on October 2nd, 1988 in Long Beach, California. That there's a reason why he surrendered to this artifact. And a lot has happened in the world since October 2nd, 1988. A lot has happened since October 26, 2001, when this movie was released in theaters in the United States. A lot has happened in the world. And, I sold off the rights to this movie when I was 24 years old to get the blessing and the luxury of getting to direct this film. And I have been working on an enormous amount of material that one might be able to put in the category of a very, very large scale sequel to this film. So we'll see what happens. But I have felt compelled to do the work. The way Francis Ford Coppola, when he slid that binder across that boardroom table at American Zoetrope, I saw the fire the gleam in his eye and the passion in his eye. And so I will always be working on this, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what the movie gods decide. We'll see what the gatekeepers decide, and just know that if something does happen, that it will be worthy and it will be true and part of the canon and something that is hopefully part of the architectural blueprints of this whole thing, because there's a whole lot of them. A vast array of blueprints that could probably fill that warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. But there's a lot there. So I've done the work and it's been very therapeutic. And so, we'll see what happens, but to be continued.
Have you spoken to Jake about it at all? Is it something that he could be involved in any capacity? Obviously, it's tricky with his character, but have you guys been in contact?
Yes, but let's see what happens.
Well, that's exciting. Whatever comes next, I'm really, really looking forward to it, Richard. I've had an absolute blast chatting with you today. Thanks so much for coming on Script Apart.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, produced by Camille Demek. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.